It is often called the Forgotten War. Overshadowed by the global scale of World War II and the controversy of the Vietnam War, the Korean War sits in history as something quieter, yet no less significant. But this was no small conflict. It was a war that reshaped borders, divided a nation, and drew in some of the most powerful countries on Earth. It was a war that brought the world dangerously close to nuclear escalation. And it is a war that, technically, has never ended. To understand the Korean War is to understand the modern world, its tensions, its alliances, and its divisions. This is the story of how one nation became two, and how that division still echoes today. Long before the war began, Korea was a single, unified country with a long and complex history. For centuries, Korea existed as an independent kingdom, deeply influenced by its larger neighbors, particularly China, but maintaining its own distinct identity, language, and culture. That independence came to an abrupt end in 1910. Japan, expanding its imperial reach across East Asia, formally annexed Korea, turning it into a colony of the Japanese Empire. For the next 35 years, Korea would exist under foreign rule. During this period, Korean culture was suppressed. The Korean language was restricted in schools, Korean names were replaced with Japanese ones, economic resources were extracted to fuel Japan's industrial growth, and many Koreans were forced into labor, both within Korea and abroad. Resistance movements emerged, both within Korea and among Koreans living overseas, but they were often met with harsh repression. By the time World War II began, Korea remained firmly under Japanese control. But the outcome of that war would change everything. In 1945, Japan surrendered at the end of World War II. With that surrender came the question, what would happen to Korea? Rather than immediately restoring full independence, Korea became entangled in the growing rivalry between two global powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. In the final days of the war, Soviet forces entered Korea from the north, while American forces prepared to enter from the south. To manage the surrender of Japanese troops, a temporary line was drawn across the Korean peninsula at the 38th parallel. The Soviets would oversee the north, the Americans would oversee the south. It was intended to be a short-term administrative division. But as tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union deepened, marking the beginning of the Cold War, that temporary division became something more permanent. In the north, under Soviet influence, a communist government was established. Its leader was Kim Il-sung, a former guerrilla fighter who had fought against Japanese occupation. In the south, with American backing, a separate government was formed under Syngman Rhee, a staunch anti-communist. By 1948, two separate states had officially emerged: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north and the Republic of Korea in the south. Both governments claimed to be the legitimate authority over the entire Korean peninsula. Neither accepted the division as final. Tension along the border began almost immediately. Skirmishes, raids, and political hostility became common. The stage was set for a larger conflict. On June 25, 1950, the situation escalated dramatically. North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in a full-scale invasion of South Korea. This was not a minor border clash. It was a coordinated military offensive involving tens of thousands of troops, tanks, and artillery. The South Korean military, less equipped and less prepared, struggled to respond. Within days, North Korean forces had captured large areas of territory. Seoul, the capital of South Korea, fell quickly. For many observers, it appeared that the South might collapse entirely. The international response was swift. The United Nations Security Council condemned the invasion and called for member states to assist South Korea. The United States took the lead, committing troops and resources to the defense of the South. Other countries, including the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and several others, joined under the UN banner. What had begun as a conflict between two parts of one country quickly became an international war. As North Korean forces advanced, UN and South Korean troops were pushed steadily southward. By August 1950, they were confined to a small area in the southeastern corner of the peninsula. This defensive position became known as the Pusan Perimeter. It was a critical moment. If this final defensive line failed, South Korea could have been completely overrun. Fighting along the Pusan Perimeter was intense. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but the line held. Reinforcements, supplies, and coordinated defense allowed UN forces to stabilize the situation. It was a turning point, not a victory, but a pause that created opportunity. That opportunity came in September 1950. Under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, UN forces launched a bold amphibious landing at Incheon, a port city near Seoul. The operation was risky. The tides were unpredictable, the terrain was difficult, and the element of surprise was essential. But it succeeded. The landing caught North Korean forces off guard. Supply lines were disrupted, communication broke down. Suddenly, the momentum of the war shifted. UN forces pushed inland, recapturing Seoul and forcing North Korean troops into retreat. What had seemed like a near defeat had turned into a rapid advance. With the tide turned, a major decision was made. Rather than stopping at the 38th parallel, UN forces continued their advance into North Korea. The objective shifted from defending South Korea to reunifying the peninsula under a non-communist government. Initially, the advance was successful. North Korean resistance weakened. UN forces moved steadily northward, approaching the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. But this advance raised serious concerns. China, which had recently undergone its own communist revolution, viewed the presence of foreign troops near its border as a direct threat. Warnings were issued, but they were not fully heeded. In October 1950, the war changed again. Chinese forces entered the conflict in large numbers. They did not declare war formally at first. Instead, they moved in quietly, using the cover of darkness and difficult terrain to their advantage. When they struck, it was sudden and overwhelming. UN forces, unprepared for the scale of the intervention, were forced into retreat. One of the most intense and challenging battles took place at the Chosin Reservoir. Conditions were extreme. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Equipment malfunctioned. Soldiers faced not only the enemy, but also the environment. Despite these challenges, UN forces managed a strategic withdrawal, avoiding complete destruction. But the broader outcome was clear. The advance into North Korea had failed. The war was shifting again. By early 1951, the front lines stabilized near the 38th parallel. Neither side was able to achieve a decisive breakthrough. The war entered a new phase, one defined not by rapid movement, but by stalemate. Trench systems were established. Artillery exchanges became routine. Small territorial gains were made and lost repeatedly. The fighting resembled the static warfare of World War I. Behind the lines, political tensions continued to rise. There were debates over strategy, disagreements between military leaders and political authorities. At one point, General MacArthur publicly advocated for expanding the war into China. This included the possibility of using nuclear weapons. The suggestion was controversial. Ultimately, it led to his removal from command. The war continued, but the risks had become clear. Peace talks began in 1951, but reaching an agreement proved difficult. Key issues included the exact location of the border and the handling of prisoners of war. Negotiations dragged on for 2 years. Meanwhile, fighting continued. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. It established a ceasefire. It created a buffer zone, the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. But it did not formally end the war. No peace treaty was signed. The Korean War remains, in a technical sense, unfinished.
The human cost of the Korean War was immense. Millions of people lost their lives. This included soldiers from both sides, as well as a large number of civilians. Cities were destroyed. Infrastructure was devastated. Families were separated, often permanently. The division of Korea meant that relatives who could once lived in the same country were now divided by one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world. For many, there was no opportunity to reunite. The impact of the war extended far beyond the battlefield.
Today, the Korean peninsula remains divided. North Korea and South Korea have developed along very different paths. South Korea has become a major global economy known for its technology, culture, and democratic institutions. North Korea, by contrast, remains one of the most isolated countries in the world, with a highly centralized government and significant military focus. The DMZ still stands as a physical reminder of the conflict. Tensions between the two sides continue, though open warfare has not resumed. The Korean War also had broader global consequences. It reinforced the division between communist and non-communist blocs during the Cold War. It led to increased military presence and alliances in East Asia, and it demonstrated how regional conflicts could quickly become international.
The Korean War may be called the Forgotten War, but its impact is anything but forgotten. It reshaped a nation, it influenced global politics, and it created a division that still exists today. It is a reminder that some conflicts do not end with a clear resolution, that the consequences of war can last for generations, and that history, even when overlooked, continues to shape the present. A war without a peace treaty, a border that still divides, and a story the world should never forget.